As you've seen in previous lessons, FileMaker calculations are by no means limited to working with numbers, quantities, or prices. They allow you to build expressions that apply logic, manipulate text, and apply and remove formatting, compare or compute dates or times, and many other useful tasks. Before we go further, there's an important concept and a term that has a significant meaning that I should mention to you. The term is value, and it has both a general and a more specific or particular meaning when describing data in FileMaker. In its more general meaning, value just means any string of characters that is entered into a field, stored in a variable, passed as a parameter, or produced as the result of a calculation, and so on. It doesn't have to represent a number or integer to be considered a value. So for example, if I enter as a calculation expression the text literal Jacob, remember that text literals are enclosed in double quotation marks. When I press the Enter key to commit the record, FileMaker returns the value Jacob as the result. So that's a fairly generic and casual use of the term value to describe a piece or element of data. But there's a more specialized meaning. In FileMaker, the term value can also refer to individual lines of text. So for example, if you have a list of text items, each separated from the preceding item by a carriage return, every item in the list is treated as a separate value. So a text field that has several words or strings of characters separated by carriage returns can be said to contain multiple values. In this case, the words 1, 2, and 3 are 3 separate values. That has several important implications, some of which have to do with indexing and relationships. But here I'd like to talk about the way values interact with calculations. Before I go on, I'm going to change the subject slightly for a moment to point out to you a particular quirk of the calculation engine in FileMaker. By design, carriage returns you put into a calculation expression, including into a text literal, are ignored and treated as though they are spaces. You can see that when I commit the record here, the list of values 1, 2 and 3 with a carriage return or a line break between each produces the result 1, 2, 3 with only a space between each of the words. So the line breaks have been commuted to spaces. If you want to insert a carriage return that won't be turned into a space when FileMaker interprets the calculation expression, you have to enter a special mark called a pilcrow, and FileMaker replaces the pilcrows with carriage returns when it evaluates the expression. For example, if I put in the value apple, then a pilcrow, then peach, then another pilcrow, then pear, you can now see that FileMaker has correctly inserted carriage returns between each of the values where the pilcrows were inserted in the text literal I supplied. If you're entering text the way I've just done here, you can type in the pilcrow character using the keyboard. On the Macintosh, you can use Option 7 to enter a pilcrow. On Windows, you need to hold the Alt key down and type 0182 on the numeric keypad. The need to substitute special characters to make the calculation engine recognize carriage returns applies only to text literals you enter directly into the calculation expression. Carriage returns in values that are derived from a field or a variable are preserved and returned intact in the calculation result. For example, if I create a new record and enter the calculation expression getNth record, targeting the calc result field, and for the part of the expression that will indicate which record to retrieve the result from, I'll enter get record number -1 to retrieve the contents of the calc result field on the previous record. I'll press enter to commit this record, and you can see that the carriage returns that existed in the calc result for the record with serial number 33 are preserved in the result on the record with serial number 34. So back to the subject of values. Whether from a text literal, a field, or from any other source, when you have a set of several text strings separated by carriage returns, FileMaker's calculation repertoire gives you the tools to work with them, splicing and dicing the lists of values and extracting individual values or groups of values at will. Let's look at a few examples. First of all, I'll enter the value count function, and I'll supply the text literal apple, peach, apricot, and pear. When I press enter, the result appears in the field at the right, and as you can see, the value count function indicates that there are 4 values in the text literal string I supplied to the function. I'm going to copy that string to the clipboard so I can use it for some other examples. FileMaker provides a function getValue, which allows us to retrieve a particular value, a specific individual value, by its number from a string of values. So in this instance, if I ask for value number 1, apple is returned. If I change the requested value to 3, apricot is returned, and so on. Similarly, there's a function named leftValues, which allows us to retrieve a specific number of values starting from the left of a string of values. So 2 values gives us apple and peach, 1 value only gives us apple, and so on. The counterpart function to leftValues is of course rightValues, and rightValues works in much the same way, returning values starting from the right of the list. And to complete the set, there's also a middleValues function. MiddleValues requires 3 parameters: the text string, the starting value, and the number of values to extract from the middle of the supplied text. In this case, middleValues has extracted, starting with the second value, 2 values, so the result is peach and apricot. Using these various functions, you can build calculations that will allow your solution to manage lists of data, deleting items from a list, extracting a given item, adding parts of 2 lists together, and so on. As it happens, working with lists isn't limited to sets of values you source from a field or variable, or enter as a text literal. There are a number of other useful calculation functions that also return their results in the form of a list. One of those is a function named list. The list function accepts an argument, which can be a field, and in the case of a related field, the list function will return a list of all of the values found on all related records. Now it happens that in this file I've created a relationship that joins a new field, a global field called group, to the group field in the functions list table. I've also placed the group global field at the top right of the current layout. So when I select a value from a list of values attached to the field, a relationship is formed to the corresponding group of functions in the functions list table from the current context here on the calculation worksheet. So if I enter a reference to the functions list function field, which is the field that holds the function name in the functions list table, when I press the Enter key to exit the record, you'll see that FileMaker retrieves a list of the various aggregate and summary functions that appear in the functions list table. If I choose a different group of functions, say the date or time functions, the calculation now returns a list of the date and time functions available in FileMaker. If I duplicate the current record and enclose the list function within another function, say the getValue function, and request value number 4, FileMaker returns list, which of course is because the 4th value is indeed the list function in the group of function names being returned by the list function itself. In addition to the list function, there are quite a few other functions that FileMaker provides which return their values in the form of a list. Let's look at a couple of examples of those. FileMaker has a function called field names. Field names requires the name of the file that you want field names from. I'll supply the name workfile27. And it also requires a parameter giving the layout that you want the names of fields from. If you don't supply the second parameter, however, the field names function simply returns the names of fields in the first table in the file. So here we have a list of the fields in the current table, the calculation worksheet table. Similarly, FileMaker has a function called layout names, which also requires the file name as a parameter. And it returns a list, in this case of only 2 items, the 2 layouts in the current file. These and many other functions provide a text result in the form of a list, which you can use the suite of values functions to manipulate in calculations within FileMaker. The ability to gather data in the form of lists of values, then manipulate the lists using calculations, has quite a few useful applications, and I'm sure you can think of some of your own. I'll be talking about some of the other implications of the uses of values in FileMaker in later lessons, but for now you might like to try your hand at using some of the calculation functions I've shown here to get familiar with the concept of working with lists of values.